Welcome to Brain Info Live, for everyone in the brain health community. Brain Info Live is about hope, health, support, education, and you. Whether you're living with Alzheimer's or a caregiver, family member, or loved one of someone who is, Brain Info Live is here for everybody.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the 21st episode. It never ceases to amaze me. The 21st episode of Brain Info Live. I am your host, Mike Kincaid of the East Coast Brain Info Live episode. And this today is going to be a really emotional show. That's the only way I can describe this. We're going to be talking about caregiver planning. We're going to be talking about what do you do? The easy way to describe it is talking about what it is you don't know that you don't know. And so today's episode is to help you know, to help you give you a heads up, to help you be able to prepare for the unknown. And I have the luxury of bringing back. I got a chance to do an interview with one of the friends of our show, Miss Judy Johnson, who is a caregiver extraordinaire, and I can't wait for you to get a chance to look at the interview. It's not even an interview, it's a chat that Judy and I had that we taped, and it's just so awesome because Judy, I like to say Judy brought the Judy. And then later in the show, we're going to do the live Q&A, and you know what that means. You get to hang out and ask questions too with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Ritchie, who is a co-worker, a team leader, but more importantly, Christine is going to be talking about caregiving planning and stages of Alzheimer's. So that's a long way to say, and you don't need a pen and pencil or piece of paper because you can always go back and rewatch this. But today's show, like all of our shows, is going to be informational, educational, emotional, of course, fun. And speaking of the fun, before we get into the discussion, it's time for you know who. And I'm going to say, as I always do, go at your own pace, because sometimes J. Lou can be a little bit rocking, but go at your own pace. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Lewis, our own J. Lou, the fitness guru from Atlanta, GA. Come on, J. Lou, let's go.
Hey, this is J. Lou, your fitness guru. Today, we want a peace of mind and calmness. If you have a comfortable chair and your water bottles, or if you just want to be on the floor, you can. Today, just bring your mind and your spirit and your calmness. Okay? Grab your water bottles. Inhale. Exhale.
Wow. You know, that was so, it had a Tai Chi kind of flavor to it. And man, that was so relaxing. That was just amazing. And remember, as soon as I get the start date for J Lo's Roku Fitness Channel TV show, I'm gonna let everybody know it because we'll be doing this all day long. All right. So next up is a conversation that I had with Judy Johnson about caregiving and stages and planning and oh my God, just so many different things. You know, what to things you don't know. And Judy's video, if you remember the last time she was on the show, we ended it with we got to keep having this conversation. So this is a continuation of that conversation that we had a few months ago. And then right after the video, we're going to kick into the live Q&A with Dr. Christine Ritchie. I'm going to read her amazing bio, and then Christine and I are going to just jump right into the conversation. So without further ado, as I always say, let's go to the videotape. So today we have an old friend who's been on the show before, Judy Johnson. She's got amazing experience as a caregiver. Welcome back to Brain Info Live, Judy.
Thanks, Mike. I'm happy to be here with you today.
So Judy, today's show is all about caregiving and caregiving planning, and you lived it. And so what advice would you give someone and I guess I was going to ask, what advice would you give someone who's been diagnosed with Alzheimer's? But let me tweak that. What advice would you give to a family member whose loved one has just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's?
That's a really great question, Mike. And, I'll probably answer it both from the person diagnosed with Alzheimer's and the family member, because Steve and I really operated as one unit. And just to remind people who may not have been on a previous recording, that Steve was diagnosed with younger onset Alzheimer's at age 59 and ended his Alzheimer's journey at age 65. So the advice that I would give would be step back, take a deep breath, and acknowledge the reality of this diagnosis in increments that work for you. I tended to follow Steve's lead of wanting to share his diagnosis with others. I'd say try to honor the fact that this is a big life event that causes a huge interruption to whatever life plans you had laid out. Begin making a new plan while trying to embrace the present, and educate yourself by turning to trusted resources, families, and friends. And, if I can go on, I'm not fond of this saying, but get your affairs in order while you can do this together. And, inevitably, waves of feeling overwhelmed can sneak up at any given moment as you face this diagnosis, and practicing gratitude can help. And Steve and I would allow ourselves at times, post-diagnosis, 15 minutes of a pity party, which would go something like this. I can't believe this is happening to us. How on earth are we going to manage all of this? We had so much more that we wanted to do. I wanted to watch our grandchildren play baseball. I'd say, I can't bear the thought of losing you. We'd turn to, thank God I have you. Thank God we have each other, our kids and grandchildren. And thank God we have love, and that love will hold us up. Many things will change, but not our love. We can do this together. So that's kind of how it would go from a pity party to a gratitude practice. But I'd also say, try to find trusted people who are willing to travel this whole journey with you, and look for hope in its hidden disguises. And this is really important. This one, I think, don't be afraid to be vulnerable, because it can open doors. That's what comes to mind for me.
I love that. Now, Judy, for those who didn't see you the first time you were on, I know Steve was the love of your life, is the love of your life. But real quick, share with folks who was Steve? Who is Steve?
Oh, yeah, the essence of Steve remains forever. Just the most wonderful human being, my soulmate and partner, father to 2 beautiful children, grandfather to 4 amazing grandchildren. He was a friend, a brother, a peace activist, and a visionary. I kind of thought he was all that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, you mentioned family. So what resources were most helpful to you and your family? Because this impacts more than just the caregiver.
Yeah, it's so true. And we were really, really blessed, because Steve had an incredible memory specialist, and she had a really keen understanding of the implications that resulted from Steve having younger onset Alzheimer's. So she recommended immediately that we reach out to the Alzheimer's Association. And it was there that we received a care consultation, we attended educational sessions, and joined a support group. And eventually, we even found new purpose and passion by sharing our voices and our story to help push public policy changes. She also recommended that we get involved with research at the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, which we did. And this helped us create a different kind of legacy and offered hope for our family's future generations.
Okay. Now, we hear that there are different stages of Alzheimer's. Does the care planning change between stages?
Yes, indeed it does. And sometimes those stages are unclear. There's no clear lines between them. But when I think about it, I think about, it really greatly differs through the stages. And I used to say that we had to be Renaissance people. In an overnight's time, things could significantly change. We began the journey as care partners, and at this stage, we grappled with the diagnosis on an even keel. And it was great for me to have Steve's support for my emotions at that time, and it was mutual. In the middle stage, we transitioned from care partners to me assuming the role of caregiving. When someone places their eternal trust in you, it can be both a burden and a gift. This was an opportunity to fulfill our vows. I needed to be a little more strategic about my emotions at this point, knowing that Steve was less available to me now as a support. And very often I felt that my mood would dictate the success of our day. So at this stage, I tried to offer independence while trying to create successful strategies, or as we call them, little victories. A day when we were both showered, fed, and had forward-facing clothes on went in the win column. But this is also when support groups bestowed me with cherished comrades who could relate to the range of experiences we were facing. And then in the late stage, I was the ultimate steward of Steve's care. Every decision was my responsibility at this point. Those same trusted people whom we had gathered at the beginning stepped in to be my support at this stage. They brought us meals, they showed up and sang to us, and just held our hands whenever we needed.
Oh, it sounds like your care plan was fluid, fluid. It changed as you were going along. But let's jump in the Wayback Machine. Was there anything that you think back now that you would have changed in your strategy?
Yeah, yes, totally. I sometimes say that I like to talk about strategies that we had that were successful and less so about the ones that weren't as successful. But in terms of checking in on our care plans, I'd say I didn't check in on that often enough. As I mentioned previously, this was an ever-changing plan. And sometimes it felt like I waited until a fire needed extinguishing before I realized that I should have checked in again and adjusted our care plan. And fortunately, what resulted from some of the public policy work we were involved in, more focus has been placed on creating care plans post-diagnosis. And it's easier to access resources now, even more so than it was 10 years ago when we were doing this. I know at Mass General Brigham, we now have a dementia care collaborative who act as Sherpas to the person living with dementia and their care circle.
So you mentioned family. You also mentioned friends. So I guess if I'm at home watching this and I'm where you were at that beginning, who would you recommend getting involved in the care planning process and why?
Yeah, that is another great question. And, I have to confess that one of the biggest fears as a caregiver is what would happen to Steve if I died before him. So for those obvious reasons, we involved our grown children and their spouses in our care plan, and a few other family members and close friends. It was complicated at the time, too, because Steve's mother had Alzheimer's, so a number of his family members were dealing with her situation. But the people that we involved in this care planning were people whom I could call upon without question and whom I knew could meet Steve's needs in the moments when I had to be elsewhere, such as a doctor's appointment or a support group. These also had to be people who trusted me and knew that what I thought was best for Steve would be the practice that they would execute while with him.
Love that they trusted you, knowing you were doing the best thing for Steve. All right, Judy, this is the question I got to ask you. In those deep, dark, late at night moments when you're with your thoughts, what did you struggle the most with in terms of planning? Did I do this? Did I not do this? Did I do it right? And does it get easier over time?
The first part of that question, I'll go into more detail. And does it get easier over time? For me, no. But, Steve was so much better at planning than me. And he was our executive planner. And as soon as we got involved with research, he made it clear that upon his death, he wanted to donate his brain. I, on the other hand, couldn't fathom a day when I would have to live without him.
Mhm.
So I had not planned ahead for Steve needing to enter a skilled nursing facility in the last 4 months of his life. His downhill decline precipitated at an unexpected pace, and this coincided with his 65th birthday and the official separation from service at his job, aka the perfect storm.
Oh, yeah.
This caused some scrambling of paperwork, changes of insurance that I really wished I had addressed a year earlier when it had been suggested to do so.
What That's interesting, Judy, because it's the old I don't know what I don't know. So you being my friend and an expert on caregiving, and that's not a big enough word. Just an expert on this life that you lived. What should be what if someone who's just now getting on who's just now accepted they're going on this journey, okay? What topics should they be looking at to be covered in a care plan? And because as I said, you don't know what you don't know. So tell me what Judy Johnson, who finally decided something's wrong with Steve, I got to start putting my ducks in order. What would you be doing?
Yeah. And again, I'm sure this will, even at this stage, I'm still not inclusive enough of everything that should be covered. But some things that come to mind are, what does this diagnosis mean for your relationship? As I said, Steve was our executive planner. Now I had to be. So understanding that there were going to be shifting roles. Seek out resources via your doctor, your social worker, your church, community. There are more resources out there than one would expect. And I think that's why I always love when there are resources all listed in the same place so people don't have to spend endless sleepless nights searching the web. And to that end, utilize technology. There are amazing apps out there now that can help you organize your care plan between family members. Talk to an elder care attorney. And part of the care plan, I think it's vital to figure out how you're going to talk to your family and friends about your diagnosis and how to expect well-meaning comments that can hurt. How to identify that circle of support for you and your partner. And then, of course, addressing a care plan with finances, insurance, understanding Medicare, Medicaid. And while accepting what you can handle, because I could take it in little teeny bits, try to learn about the later stages of this disease and make plans. And while plan A is being planned, plan B should be investigated also. And I think it's important to journal your journey because we're losing memories with dementia. And you're in a whirlwind as a care partner or caregiver. So anything that can be remembered down the road, I cherish the things that I wrote that I would never remember today had I not written them.
So Judy, I'm gonna, before I get to my last question, I'm gonna ask you a tough question. How did you guys tell the kids?
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, of course, we had our suspicions.
As did they.
Yes, they did also. Yes. And because we used to joke with Steve and say, oh, you're absent-minded about this or that. But we, I don't know, timing sort of worked out providentially that our son had an injury in his wrist and had to come to Boston for some surgery. And our daughter lives right next door. And we were able to sit them down in the same room and tell them. And we had a good cry together and, committed ourselves to each other and to Steve. And we had to also do this with Steve's parents and with his mother having Alzheimer's. We had to repeat the story 4 times. And that was more painful than maybe telling our kids because there was just already, we could already see what Alzheimer's manifested itself to look like. So.
It's funny. I didn't think of that until you
Yeah.
just mentioned that.
Yeah.
So, Judy, my friend, if there's one thing you want folks to know about this conversation, if they don't remember anything else about all the amazing words and heart that you shared, if there's one thing you want them to remember, what would that one thing be?
You know me, Mike. I can never put one thing in one word, but I guess I would
Say
just say,
one word. I didn't say one word.
yeah, don't go it alone. Seek help and guidance. And if you're able to, try to strive to live even post-diagnosis as Steve did. And I capture it in a quote that he wrote. Embrace life with joy and wonder and live each moment with faith and peace.
There you go. There you go. Judy, you know what? Whenever I need to have that cup of emotion refilled, I'm going to have to bring you back on.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for
Thank you so much.
sharing conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for again sharing Steve with us.
My pleasure to share him.
Take care.
Thank you.
Like I said, Judy brings the Judy. It's always so amazing. So here's something interesting, folks. You don't, you have friends and you know them as your friends, and sometimes your friends are your coworkers, but you really don't know about their background till you get to read their bios. So I'm going to introduce my friend and coworker. Dr. Christine Ritchie is the Kenneth L. Miniker Chair in Geriatrics and Director of Research for the Division of Palliative Care and Geriatrics at Geriatric Medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital. She is a board certified geriatrician and a palliative care physician and conducts research focused on optimizing quality of life for those with chronic serious illnesses and more multiple mobilities. She co-leads the NINR-funded Palliative Care Research Cooperative and the National Home-Based Primary Care and Palliative Care Consortium, which seeks to improve our understanding and care of the homebound population. So, Christine, after having blown your ego up with all of that, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is really terrific to be here with you.
Yeah, Christine, we're going to continue. Watching Judy, a million questions come up from the conversation afterwards, and if it's okay with you, I want to just follow along with a lot of what we heard from Judy.
Perfect.
So let's jump right in. Judy mentioned the caregiving strategy changes from early to mid to late stage. In this show over the 21 episodes, wow, we've talked about early warning signs. We've talked about the middle stages. But what are the signs when you're transitioning from one stage to the next stage, and give us an idea of what the late stage could look like? And I understand no two people are alike, but there are some similarities. And no one ever talks about that last stage. So let's do that.
Great. No, I'd be delighted to talk about that. And you're right. It's a little blurry sometimes going from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. That being said, early on, what people will say is that, they thought something was not quite right, but maybe a little hard to figure. And then things slowly become more obvious. And by the middle stage of dementia, things are pretty clear that things aren't right. And a lot of times this is where we start seeing people become more anxious or perhaps more sort of not engaged with the world. We may find that people get more frustrated and angry, and they might start becoming resistant to sort of the things that in the past they would have had no concerns about doing, things like bathing or dressing or things like that. And then there's that sort of slow change from sort of resistance and some challenge around function that means that people have to be more involved to that later stage when people really need a lot of support. And for some people, That might even mean 24/7 round the clock support, helping them with a lot of their activities of what we would consider daily life, like eating, like bathing, like toileting. And they may even start having trouble sitting up without support. They may have trouble speaking. Many times people will say a few words, but they may have trouble speaking in full sentences. And that's when you start also seeing people have some difficulty with swallowing. Maybe they hold on to their food, but they don't want to swallow it. And that's when you also start seeing more people develop pneumonia, which is common at the end of somebody's life who's living with dementia. So, and as you said, like that is sort of the usual change and the usual way we see things. But for each person with dementia and for the different types of dementia, what that looks like and how fast that change occurs is pretty variable. And that's part of the challenge for anybody who's walking alongside somebody with dementia, is that uncertainty, because it can be pretty unpredictable about how quickly or slowly that change occurs.
It's like saying some people it's faster. I've always believed that the more active you are, the slower that progression is, and that's what kind of throws people off, I think. When we talk about care planning, and there are some people who, you've seen it, they've got the charts and they know exactly Monday through 12:01 a.m. Sunday what's going to happen. And then there's some folks who think they've got it all together with their care plan, but there's some common pitfalls, common mistakes. And how would you advise families, I guess, to handle this care plan? How do you deal with pitfalls?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And just as a little backstory, and I don't know how much we've talked about this, Mike, but I got to experience this both as a clinician, but also as a family member, because my father had dementia and he lived with me for the last years of his life. So I got to make a bunch of mistakes also, and sort of reflect on that in thinking about care planning. And I guess what I would say is that a lot of times what happens is we keep thinking we can wait until later. And what I would say is, as soon as it's clear that someone is living with dementia, planning ahead will save so much difficulty later and prevent the crisis. Because what happens often is that people will go, well, I'll wait till later. And then what happens is a crisis. And then we're reacting and it's much more difficult. So in terms of sort of planning ahead, and Judy mentioned this as well, it's worth thinking about some basic things like, okay, let's say I'm the person, I've just been diagnosed with dementia. I know that in my future, I may have more difficulty speaking for myself. So I really need to identify somebody, hopefully that I trust, that can speak for me. It may or may not be a family member, by the way, but identifying that person who can speak for me, and then making sure they know that I've said, that I basically want them to be that person, and that they also know what's important to me. So I can't emphasize how important that first step is. And then the second piece that's sort of associated with it is not just thinking about like that person who's going to speak for me in healthcare or in medical care, but like, what about finances? Or what about like settings of care, and sort of what kind of settings of care I might or might not like more or less. Judy talked about how at the end of Steve's life, she had to put him in a nursing facility, and in a way that I think caught her by surprise. And that was true for me as well. At the end of my father's life, I had to put him in a nursing facility, and I kept having this idea that wasn't going to be something I'd have to deal with. And so had I planned a little bit more in advance, that would have helped me. So, and asked him, like, I mean, I knew him pretty well, but what kind of settings of care would he have liked more or less, just in terms of sort of their vibe? I think that would be helpful. And then the other thing is knowing that people's functional status is going to change over time. How can sort of one setting be set up to navigate that? So like are there things we can do now to make the bathroom more safe, right? Or are there things we can do now to make other parts of the house more safe while it's not a crisis and where it doesn't feel too weird, but just feels planful? And then I think, last but definitely not least is like Judy mentioned the roles and the role change. So if that person has been taking care of the finances, what are the passwords? Like, how do I make sure I know how to get access to the financial issues so that I can truly support them, right? Now we have all this stuff that's digital, and it means a whole nother layer of planning to just make sure that even that's accounted for. And the last thing I'll say about sort of this planning bit is, and Judy mentioned this too, is the Alzheimer's Association has some awesome stuff on their website. And then the other place that I love to go to is something called the Administration for Community Living, or ACL. They have this thing called an elder care locator, where you can sort of look and say, well, what kind of settings might work for me, or what kind of settings might I be interested in investigating? And they'll provide a lot of guidance that way too.
And there's one more thing that I'm going to piggyback on what you just said. You have to tell the family. You have to tell everybody what the plan is, because as I learned with organ donation, if you haven't told others that you're an organ donor, you're not an organ donor. Because if they have the right to say no when that time comes, they're going to do it.
Right. Mike, I am so glad you brought that up, because we often see folks, especially early on in their disease journey, sort of ambivalent, reticent about telling other people. And I totally appreciate that. It's a hard diagnosis to adjust to and adapt to. And the biggest gift you can give yourself and your family is to let them know. Yeah. That way they can then get the tools they need to continue to provide the support that you would benefit from. And not only that, to learn how to actually walk inside you in the journey, as opposed to sort of, pushing back and actually making life harder.
So you mentioned some interesting things, long-term care services, and Medicare now covers care planning. But are there other resources you'd recommend for low-income families that may not have clear access to medical and or legal services? I mean, I've heard, and I know you've heard this, astronomical numbers of how much it costs for long-term care facilities.
Absolutely. In fact, I would say it's one of the best kept secrets, right? I mean, I feel like people don't realize that a lot of these services are just so expensive. Some people plan for college, but they don't plan for this kind of thing, right? And so I feel like this is really a huge issue to make sure that we have the ability to find out the information that we need. And again, we brought up the Alzheimer's Association. They do have a dementia care consultation program that's without cost to families. It provides like one-stop shopping, and they will, Judy mentioned sort of having something all on one page. They can provide sort of a spectrum of services, and I think that can be incredibly, really valuable. The National Alliance of Caregiving has some really awesome stuff. They also have, like the Alzheimer's Association, like caregiver support groups where you can get a lot of peer guidance, which frankly, a lot of people who are going through this are the best guides and advisors. And then there's a few books, Mike, that I really love that I recommend. And the one that's one of my new favorites is called The Complete Family Guide to Dementia. And it's written by a guy named Tom Harrison and Brent Forrester. It just came out last year. It's particularly useful if you're an adult child of somebody who's living with dementia and sort of navigating what that looks like. Their role changes, and it can be really tough that way. And then a few others is the Dementia Caregiver Guide by Gail Willander, and then also Learning to Speak Alzheimer's by Coste, C-O-S-T-E. And all of those books, they're maybe a small investment on the front end, but they're totally worth it. And they can sort of be almost like like you could imagine like getting the family together and saying, let's all look at this chapter and sort of talk about it. And it keeps it from being sort of too directive, but gives us a chance to reflect on sometimes challenging topics that we might not all otherwise bring up.
All right, Judy talked about this, and you talked about it a little bit. So you're no longer able to deny something is wrong. You realize, I got to do something. And Judy mentioned taking this in small bites. My question to you: what would that again? You cannot deny the problem. So you're sitting down. Hopefully, you've got somebody that you can go back and you can have this conversation with. But what's that first bite? That first step that we got to do something. What's that first thing?
Well, let's assume, for example, that even there isn't clarity about what exactly is going on. Something's not right. Then I think the first step is to go to your doctor and say, I need to have this evaluated. It's amazing how many times we as doctors just don't pick up on these sort of subtle changes that are going on. And so whether it's you or your loved one that is going through this, or, friend or neighbor, really encourage them to go to their doctor and say, I'm worried about this and I really would like to have this evaluated. Because honestly, even the diagnostic journey can be short, not long. I mean, it can be long is what I'm saying. It's not short. And so, once you have clarity about what's going on, it's much easier to say, okay, this is our reality, kind of like what Judy was saying. This is our reality now. Let's think about what this means for us going forward. And then we sit down, come up with a game plan. We basically think about sort of what the short-term issues are in the long term. But when we don't have clarity about the diagnosis, we just know something's not right, then that's really that murky space that's very hard for people. So I think getting the diagnosis is very, very important. And then with that information, then using it to be empowered to take the next steps. But remembering it can take a while to even get the diagnosis. A lot of times what will happen is you'll go to the doctor, they'll say, well, yeah, something's not quite right. Come back, or I'm going to send you to get another test, maybe a brain image, and so it's not like you're going to know that day. It can be, you have to set yourself up for like maybe a 3 to 6 month journey of even just figuring out what the diagnosis is. But if you really have a good idea this is going on, that doesn't keep you from continuing to start thinking about the planning at the same time.
There you go. And let me tag on one more thing. You are your loved one's number one advocate. You hit it right on the head when you said this, that you're not going to, it's not like a pregnancy test. It's not like a COVID test. There's not little lines that all of a sudden say, bingo, you got it. It's a continuous process and you have to stay with it. That was perfect.
Absolutely.
Let me go back, and you kind of mentioned this. You've come to the conclusion. It's later. You realize that dad is going to need to go in a long-term facility. You cannot do this at home. What do you look for? I mean, a dear friend of mine and a friend of the show, Dr. Paul Rea, years ago wrote a book on how to find a good nursing long-term care facility. Back in the day, we used to call it the urine test. If you walked in the front door and you smelled urine, you turned around. What would be some of the things that you would advise to a family to look for?
Yeah, that's still a good test, by the way. The smell test or the sniff test is still a good test because it tells a lot about essentially how careful and not this, if you come into a facility and it just smells like air deodorizer, that's not a good sign. It needs to be truly a situation where you feel like people are getting proactive, thoughtful care in the moment and not covering things up. So I still think that's a very good test. I think the other thing that's important to do if you're actually looking at facilities is to pay attention at two things. Number one, how any of the members of the team, any of the members of the staff are actually treating the residents. What does that look like? Do you see respect and dignity afforded to the residents? Is there thoughtful compassion and patience? And then how are they also treating each other? What does the culture of the organization look like? That's and you can just observe, and you'll get so much information just by doing that. And then there are things that are a little bit one step removed, which is that the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services actually has a star rating for nursing homes. And so you can look on their website and see what their star rating is, and you can see if they have a lower star rating, why. And then I would also, ask if you can for a reference. That is, if there's another resident in that facility, you could say to the staff, would you be willing to ask that person's family member if I could talk to them? So just like we get references in daycares where we sort of check out the other parents and seeing, what they think about the situation, who are much more likely to tell you the real deal, it's worth getting references.
The friends of the show all know this. My grandmother had dementia. And I remember asking my mom at one point, my mother had to look for a long-term care facility at the end of grandma's life, toward the end of her life. And I asked her afterwards, what were some of the things you were looking for? And I'll never forget this. She said, after they gave me the tour, if I was leaving the facility and the hair on the back of my head stood up, that was something that was one of the signs, because she said, because in the end, I'm leaving mom there. I'm leaving my mother there. And if I don't feel comfortable with that place, my mother isn't going to feel comfortable. I've never forgotten that intuition of something's not right. All right, this is your chance for a shameless plug, and we love shameless plugs on our show. You have a program called the Dementia Care Collaborative, and you have an event coming up on the 21st of February. It's called Creating a Post-Diagnosis Game Plan. Tell us more about it. Shameless plug.
Well, it's perfect timing given what we're talking about today and care planning. The Dementia Care Collaborative is really all about offering dementia education not only to clinicians, which we do, but also to persons living with dementia and their care partners, and looking for ways to provide emotional and social support to people who are navigating this complicated journey, as we're just talking about. And so this particular session, which is part of our Conversations with Caregivers series and is on February 21, is going to be led by Dr. Matt Russell, who's an amazing geriatrician and palliative care physician here at Mass General Hospital. And he's basically going to be sort of talking about some of the things that we've been talking about today, maybe in slightly more detail about, okay, you've gotten this diagnosis, now what? What are the things that one has to adapt to, think about, maybe new habits to integrate into one's life? How do we think about, our family and our community and social engagement? How do we think about slowing the progression? How do we think about potentially, and Judy brought this up, engaging in research that might help provide that extra layer of support by having another community to connect with? So shameless plug, yes, please join us for Conversations with Caregivers. And you can go to our website, which is dementiacarecollaborative.org, www.dementiacarecollaborative.org, and feel free to sign up.
All right. I always tell people this is the fastest 45 minutes on the internet. We're just about out of time, and we've talked, and you and Judy both talked about the need for support, like joining a support group in something. So I don't want to go there again, but so I guess my final question is this, and I ask this of all my guests and my friends: if there's one thing you want folks to remember, what's that one thing about our conversation today?
Well, since you gave Judy more than one thing, I'm going to take the same license and say three. First is to really embrace this journey with compassion, both for that person that's living with dementia and for yourself. You know, there's so many woulda, coulda, shouldas that we can all say to ourselves about anything that we do in life. So it's so important to be compassionate to yourself. This is a really hard journey. It's beautiful. It has many moments of joy in it, but it's not an easy journey. I think plan. It's so much easier to be proactive than reactive. And then, as Judy said, and I just want to reiterate it, don't go it alone. That may mean making new friends, putting yourself out there, but don't go it alone. It's just, life is so much better in community. And we know this now, especially because of what we lived through with COVID. So do this with others. Walk along this path with others, and don't do it alone.
Don't do it alone. That's the perfect way to end this conversation. Don't do it alone. And Christine, by the way, our amazing director, Alexa, just sent me a little note saying that your event coming up is our spotlight resource for today. So folks will be able to see the information at the end of the show.
Thank
Christine,
you.
thank you for I'm going to drag you back on here again.
I would be so delighted.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing your heart and your wisdom with us.
It's my joy.
All righty. All right. So now it's poll time. Woohoo! That time of the show where we throw up our quick poll, and this one is kind of extensive. It's kind of big, but it's multiple choice as always. And Alexa's going to throw it up there on the screen while I'm going to be reading it. Which of the following is not good advice for planning when dealing with dementia? So which is not good advice for planning when dealing with dementia? A, plan for in-home and long-term care costs. B, make sure you don't automate payments so that you and your loved one don't fall prey to financial scams. C, start discussions as early as possible. D, review plans regularly and update financial and legal documents as needed. So which is not good advice? Plan for in-home and long-term care costs, getting ready for the future. B, make sure you don't have automatic payments for life insurance, mortgage, gas, any kind of bills. So make sure you don't have that automatic payments so that you and your loved ones don't fall prey to financial scams. C, start discussions with everybody from family, co-workers, neighbors. Start discussions as early as possible about what you're going to do. Or D, review plans regularly and update financial and legal documents as needed. I mean, we heard from Judy, we heard from Christine. You want to update. See, I'm giving things away. but we did hear about, that you want to make sure your ducks are in order and you got things going the way they should be. So again, which is not good advice for planning when dealing with dementia. And and it's A, again, plan for in-home and long-term care. Plan for having someone come and take care of your dad. And our answer is in, and as always, you guys nail it. We got 100% of folks clicked off B, which is you want to make sure you have automated payments. You want to make sure that the mortgage is getting paid automatically, that the bills are being paid automatically, because God knows you don't want that person calling the house saying, I'm calling from the IRS, blah, 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 blah. You want to make sure everything is done automated. You would be surprised over the years how many people I have met who the children discover that there was something wrong with whichever one of the parents that usually takes care of the bills, who gets dementia. They discover something's wrong because they go over to visit and they see those. I've even heard of foreclosure notices. debit bill, things that just say these bills haven't been paid. So it's time for me. Well, before I do my wrap up, I want to go to the resources. So let's pull up the resource list if we could, and then I'm going to do my wrap up on for today. And so for the Boston area, we've got Mass General Hospital. We've got the Dementia Care Collaborative Caregiver Support Program, which Christine was provided us with the email address for it. You can go to it, or you can just Google Dementia Care Collaborative Caregiver Support Program. Quick drink. For national resources, we have from the National Institute on Aging, NIA, legal and financial planning for people with dementia. From the Alzheimer's Association, we've got care planning. From Us Against Alzheimer's, we've got caring for a person with Alzheimer's. And from Brain Guide, we've got living well with dementia in the community. Now, these are all care planning resources. And I want to say this. When you go to the internet, you want to go to a reputable place. You want to go to some place like the Alzheimer's Association, like Bright Focus. You want to go to organizations that really do have resources for you. So do your homework. That's what I'm saying is just do your homework when it comes to getting services. Now, my wrap up is going to be really simple. There's an old saying that before you can take care of somebody else, you got to make sure you take care of yourself. So we have to take care of ourselves, because we're no good to our loved ones if we fall apart first. And my last thought, and I've said this before, but Judy just reminded me of it. The thing about having a loved one with Alzheimer's is there's no chiseled in stone date on when they're going to forget who you are. And so my recommendation is this: every time you're with them, every time you're with Nana, every time you're with Pawpaw, every time you're with your loved one who's living with this disease, when you say goodbye, tell them you love them, because this might be the last time they remember who you are. And I don't want you to have that experience, because it will break your heart as someone who's been there and experienced it. So, and I don't mean to end it on a low note, because the fact is that they had an incredible life, and our job as those who come behind them is to share that life and share their legacy. So that's my wrap up. My name is Mike Kincaid. I'm from the Massachusetts Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. This is the 21st episode of Brain Info Live, and you are my amazing audience, and I thank you for hanging out with me. Everybody, take care and have a wonderful day. And I'll see you around the neighborhood. Bye-bye.